Oh, kind of hungry. I feel like I could use a bit of a snack.
It's delish.
I quit veggies for a whole year, and you know what? I didn't really miss them. In this video, I'm going to share with you my experience of dabbling and dipping my toes into the carnivore diet in 2024, and the surprises and challenges I had along the way, along with some of my key takeaways. Now, this is going to be a very long and in-depth video, so I do not want to waste your time. However, we are talking about diet here, so I think it's important to properly set the vibe so that you can know whether this video is for you or not. So there are two big caveats to start off with. The first is that this is not a video aiming to tell you what you personally should eat. This is a video about what I ate last year. I don't care what you eat, be it animal-based, plant-based, kosher, halal, or you just eat Mountain Dew and Doritos for most of your teenage years like I did. You do you. I would, and I will, however, encourage you to think a little bit more critically about diet and nutrition, but it's about having an open mind, not a closed mind. I do not think that the carnivore diet is the only healthy diet. I do think it is one possible one, however, but for God's sake, have some compassion for people who think differently than you do, who grew up in different food cultures and have different backgrounds than you do, and who choose different ways of eating based upon their different goals and their different sources of information than you. My wife is a vegetarian, and so throughout this whole year experience, the center of the Venn diagrams of what I eat and what she ate was just eggs and dairy, right? But you know what? I still love her, and I think she still loves me. So while I am absolutely happy to hear about your personal thoughts and experiences as they relate to diet and nutrition, I have no time for any unconstructive, zero experience diet zealotry in the comments. So if that's you, keep walking. The second caveat is that while I will talk more about the specific things that I ate later in the video, I'm not too concerned whether what I actually ate during this time fits your definition of a carnivore diet or of an animal-based diet or of the lion diet or whatever they're calling these things these days, okay? I did exactly what felt right for me given my personal circumstances, and if that doesn't map onto a pre-existing schema that you understand or that you know, that's okay. I'm open to new lessons and to acquiring new experiences and learning from them, but I'm trying to avoid the dogma. So I don't care if what I did doesn't match your specific definitions of what a carnivore diet looks like, okay? And with that said, let's get right into it. I'm gonna tell this story chronologically rather than grouped by topic. That way you can sort of relive what it was like to be me experimenting with a carnivore diet for the very first time. So it all started in October of 2023. My wife was abroad on a business trip for the whole month, so I thought, damn, this is like a pretty good opportunity. I could try something new here. Now, many people might take up a new hobby like painting or gardening, but me, I decided to purge the house of all vegetables. Now, I had a couple inspirations for this. Around this time, I had watched Dave McLeod's Patty's Diet video, which I highly recommend to all of you. Dave McLeod is an absolute idol of mine, one of the greatest climbers of all time. He's an absolute legend. I have 2 of his books, and I really love his nuanced approach to nutrition and training and just like lifestyle strategies in general. And his results from eating only McDonald's patties for 30 days were pretty darn compelling. Now, prior to this, I had previously done a strict ketogenic diet for several months where I was eating animal foods and plant foods, but just low carb. And so I had already witnessed firsthand the ridiculous energy benefits of a low carb diet. And so I was interested to see, could I get more benefits from cutting out plants entirely, or would it not make a difference at all? I also had a secondary motivation, which was that I discovered that my local supermarket had a must sell today section by the butcher counter, and all of the meats there were 50% off. And I was just pretty stoked on the idea of hitting the meat raffle every single week to get to stock up on discount meats. And so this brings us to one key aspect of my motivation for doing the carnivore diet that's a bit different than what you'll see from most creators in this space. I would say that the vast majority of carnivore anecdotes and experiences that I've seen on YouTube and other social platforms are from people that are trying it in order to solve some sort of existing problem in their life. They might be suffering from a chronic health problem, maybe an autoimmune disease, or other serious symptoms. But not me. My starting point was as a relatively healthy 32-year-old. I was in the process of really getting into weight training at the time, and I already loved climbing and living actively, and I had no real serious health issues to speak of. However, in the realm of sports, I've always felt pretty weak compared to my peers, pretty slow, pretty bad at cardio, and just like I don't adapt to training as fast as some other people do. It's like I have to just do more work in order to get to the same level than a lot of my peers. I've also been quite prone to exercise-related injuries in the last couple years. However, compared to like the average American, I was pretty fit and pretty healthy. Notably, I don't take any medications, and I guess that's kind of like a flex these days. So I'm fortunate. I was healthy and I was doing quite well. I also wasn't trying this diet in order to lose weight, as you'll see that by the end of it, I'm actually using the diet to aggressively build muscle rather than to lose weight. So really, I was just looking to see if I could use this to improve my performance, my mental health, and basically just anything about my life with this diet. I'm quite curious about things, and I firmly believe in taking risks in order to try out different lifestyle choices for yourself. One of the big takeaways from this experiment was that there are plenty of potential gains and life-changing experiences out there, some of them may be hiding in plain sight, which you'll never be able to experience unless you actually take some risks and try it out. And I would go so far as to say that just sort of feeling good enough is an absolutely terrible reason not to take risks every so often. The more that I take calculated risks, the more I grow and the more tools that I learn about. So many of you watching this might be thinking, oh, well, this is an interesting anecdote, but like me, I really love eating bread, or I love eating cake, or I love eating out at restaurants with my friends. These are so important to my lifestyle that I could never take such a risk to try something like a carnivore diet because there's no way I'd be able to stick to it. And to that, I would say almost definitely you are wrong. That type of thinking is called loss aversion, and it's a known cognitive bias wherein we overvalue the perceived loss associated with the change, and we drastically undervalue the perceived gains because we haven't actually experienced them. So in order to actually make rational decisions about drastic changes in your life, you kind of need to make that change in your life, see how it goes. And then if after experiencing the change you don't like it, you can always just revert back. But if you don't try, you really won't know what it would be like. And your capacity to imagine that is probably not very good. And so if you never question something as basic as your nutrition strategy, which you probably just inherited from your friends or family or culture around you, you could be leaving some serious gains and positive experiences on the table, because we really are what we eat. Every single atom in your body came from food, water, or air, and nothing more, right? So what you are made of is gonna have some impact on your life. So with some bargain meats in tow, I finally got to work on the year without veggies. Now for the first few days, and really for most of the year actually, I basically ate 2 main meals a day. The first meal I would eat around noonish, and it would usually just be a bunch of eggs and a small amount of meat. I would vary how I cooked my eggs and which meats I was eating throughout the year, but basically it was just eggs and meat sauteed in a pan the whole year long. Then in dinner, after some sort of evening activity, I would have my second meal, which was usually just meat or fish, sometimes with a bit of dairy or eggs as well. Now, in between these, I would sometimes snack on fresh tuna sashimi in the afternoon, or I would have a glass of homemade bone broth that I made, or just enjoy a nice cold glass of milk. But the lion's share of my calories are coming from these 2 big-ass meals. If you want to see what a typical day looks like in more detail, I have a What I Eat in a Day video. You can check that out. And in the B-reel, I have tons of footage of the meals I actually ate. And you'll notice that I am not too gourmet at all, because I think that food should be about nutrition and how that food makes you feel, and not much more than that. So the morning after my first day of carnivore, I had my first surprise. So normally, I'm the type of guy who poops about 30 minutes after my first morning coffee, like clockwork. And today was no different, except it was. I went for my poop and it was tiny. Like if I'm normally used to like a fat Johnsonville brat, this was more like a Tootsie Roll. And it was a no wiper. Of course, I only know that because I did wipe. But I swear to you, that sheet of toilet paper was completely clean. I also noted that it was like basically odorless. Very interesting. On the evening of the second day, I started to notice a general feeling of sustained energy. And anyone who has tried keto before will know this feeling. Your body starts to go into ketosis, and suddenly there's just a feeling of consistent energy and like clearness of thought. Now, this might strike you as a bit fast, only like 40 hours after last having carbs. But as I mentioned, I've done keto twice before for long periods of time. So I've gotten through the fat burning adaptations before. I've also done several 24 to 100-hour fasts over the last 5 years. So I'm decently familiar with these sensations. Furthermore, I did a high intensity strength workout the first day, and then I bouldered for a few hours in the evening. So I probably did a good amount of work to start depleting my glycogen stores a bit faster than usual. So at this point, it's really just feeling like a keto diet, but at super speed. And so for those of you who've never tried a keto diet and don't know what energy feels like on that, I'll try to break it down for you for a little bit. The first thing that happens on a keto diet is that I learned to differentiate between the concepts of hanger and hunger. Now, I used to think that hanger was a mandatory thing, that it was just a slightly more extreme version of normal hunger, that if I went on a long hike but didn't bring any snacks, I'd be stressed out and irritable. That if I went out to eat and there was a long wait for the lunch food, I'd start to get antsy and maybe feel a little bit faint. That if I hadn't had my dinner yet, I couldn't make clear, rational decisions. And I would challenge you, dear viewer, to think about the loved ones that you spend your time with. How many of those people around you experience these hanger symptoms from time to time? For me, I'd say it's well over 50% of the people I know. People are always thinking about their next meal. They're very frequently eating low quality snacks or like ordering takeout in order to tide them over because they're too hungry to wait. Now, doing keto for the first time completely freed me from this. I realized that I could feel hungry, i.e., have a moderate desire for food, without any emotional attachment to that feeling, without feeling like an energy crash is imminent, and without being irritable. And so when I'm doing a low carb way of eating, I never have the sudden urge to eat. When mealtime does come, I can eat and thoroughly enjoy it, but I never feel a need to do it. And of course, I understand logically that I don't really need to eat all the time. I could survive for several weeks on zero food and be completely fine. In fact, I've done 100-hour fasts with no food and feel amazing and great clarity of thought throughout the entire thing. So it's actually kind of bizarre that when I'm eating carbs regularly, I sometimes can't go even 2 or 3 hours without feeling like I'm going to crash. So on carnivore, it was the same. My entire relationship with hunger just shifted. Hunger is just something that's there that reminds you to eat. But the energy, most of which comes from actually burning fat, is there all the time, ready whenever you need it. Hunger is simply optional. I can simply choose not to experience it by not eating carbohydrates. And that's pretty fucking powerful. Like, honestly, life hits a bit different when you're not losing focus every few hours being derailed by thoughts of hunger. It's pretty darn freeing. I can wake up and go spearfishing, spending hours in the water without eating breakfast, and never feel the slightest bit deprived of energy or hungry. And then when I go home in the afternoon or evening, I'll just eat a bit more. There's no need to snack for energy's sake. I'm only snacking if I want to increase my overall energy intake for the day, like if I'm trying to gain weight or if I'm going to be doing way more physical activity than usual. So day 3 comes around and I have another tiny little poop. So I think there were 2 factors at play here. The first is that I was just eating a bit less. As you'll see, I lost about 2 kilos in the first month of the diet. So it's likely that I was just eating a little bit less, and that would correspond to also producing a little bit less waste. However, the difference in size was not completely accounted for by just the amount of weight that I lost. Because later times in the year, I consciously bulked in order to gain weight, and still the poops remained smaller than when I was on a mixed diet. Why? Well, ultimately, I'm not quite sure, but here's some speculations of mine on what the mechanisms might be for this sort of diet. First of all is the lack of fiber. Fiber isn't digestible, and it has known effects on bowel movements. So when you eat fiber, it's always excreted as a waste product, but if you don't eat fiber, then your poops won't include that extra waste product that gives you no nutrition. And I honestly feel like now, after avoiding fiber for a very long time, that as if my guts were kind of working overtime in order to get rid of that fiber as fast as possible, making me have bigger overall poos. And when I don't consume fiber, I feel like I just poop when I'm ready. The second potential reason here is that I'm basically substituting fat for carbohydrates in the diet. And a fat is, of course, much more energy dense than carbs. Each gram of carbohydrates will give you about 4 calories of energy, whereas each gram of fat will give you about 9 calories of energy, so more than twice the amount. And this fact is often used as an argument for why people should avoid fats, because if you eat the same mass of a carb-rich food versus a fat-rich food, the fat-rich food is going to have more calories in it. It's going to give you more energy. But I now find this idea pretty ridiculous. Because ultimately, if you're eating based on hunger signals, your body is not like measuring with a scale how much mass you have consumed and telling you to stop eating once you have consumed sufficient mass, right? I don't think that's how it works. Though in English, we do use the term full to describe a feeling of satiety, I don't think it literally corresponds to a state where your stomach has zero room left in it, right? It's much more complex than that because we've all noticed situations where we've eaten a huge amount of food and then we still have room for dessert. As a very easy experiment, you could try eating sticks of butter to satiety, which of course are mostly fat, or eating potato chips to satiety. I almost guarantee you that you will eat more calories and more mass of the potato chips than of the butter because the butter and the fat in it is extremely satiating. And carbs are notoriously less so, which is of course why we always have room for dessert even after we've eaten a whole meal. And because chips are literally designed and engineered to make you overeat them. So some quick math here. If you previously ate 100 grams of carbs for 400 calories of energy, you would only need to eat 44 grams of fat in order to get that same amount of energy. And so if you're eating for like a maintenance level of food, so that means neither gaining or losing weight in the long term, then you'd be consuming 50% less mass of food. So then you'll have the sensation of feeling a bit lighter and less full because you literally will have less food in your digestive system at any given time. And I think this would also result in your stools being smaller because they will literally contain less mass of waste as well. So obviously this simple example ignores protein and other non-macronutrient parts of food, but I think it illustrates the idea that's at play here. You're getting a lot of your nutrition from a denser thing, and so you need to eat less of that thing in total. And this leads me to my second observation of day 3 on the carnivore diet, which continues to this very day. My level of gas dropped from, let's just say, an embarrassingly high amount to like virtually zero. Now, previously I had made the connection that if I ate a lot of beans and lentils, I'd be a bit fartier than normal. Sometimes I'd have kind of painful trapped gas, almost like cramps even after meals. And after a really big meal, I feel like physically bloated, like I was full to the brim and going to explode. But I kind of just thought that that was what it means like to be full, and everyone experiences this. And to be fair, my friends and family would make similar remarks. You know, they'd say things like, "Oh, I ate too much, I'm bloated, I'm stuffed," with like decent regularity. A bit more around the holidays, but like it would occur in daily life. But on day 3 of the carnivore diet, my gas dropped virtually to zero. It turns out the way that I was living was not the only way, and that there was in fact a secret option with no bloating, almost zero stanky ass farts, and no intestinal discomfort. So the only time that I was farting was first thing in the morning, like a few minutes before I felt the urge to poop. So it was kind of like a little alarm bell letting me know that it was time for business. And I can report that that gas-free state of being continues to this day. I do occasionally fart, but it's maybe like 2% of the previous rates on a mixed diet. As I'll talk about later in much more detail, I would have some cheat meals over the year, and almost without exception, some intestinal discomfort and unwelcome gas followed for like the next 12 hours. Then when I would go back to being strict again, these symptoms would just magically disappear. So this dramatic drop in gas was pretty exciting, and it definitely had me excited and hopeful for more interesting changes to come. On that third day, I noticed something else regarding my physical fitness. So at this time in my life, and still to this day, I'm doing a style of weightlifting called high intensity training, where I train very intensely to muscular failure and beyond, and then I take a few days off to recover before doing it again. So in the first 4 months of training this way, before starting a carnivore diet, I would be very fatigued after these workouts. Not just in the muscles themselves, but like a general systemic energy level fatigue. I'd be sore for 1 to 3 days afterwards and only feel ready to complete another workout like 4 days later. So at this time I was doing 3 workouts in every 2 weeks. Now I made great gains in strength and muscle in this time, as I talked about in my 1 year like Mike Menser video, but the fatigue and soreness was real. But on that third day of skipping out on plants, I woke up feeling pretty well recovered from the previous day's workout. I still had some muscular DOMs, but I didn't feel like I had been hit like a truck. And by lunchtime, I kind of felt as if I was like fresh enough to do a workout again. Now I didn't because I thought that would be hubris, but I kind of felt that way. So I took my normal 4 days of rest, and then I did my next workout. And this day was my deadlift day. And the deadlift in particular would always leave me feeling shattered. I remember the first time I did a high intensity deadlift session. I had to literally take a nap in the afternoon. But today was different. I tried my hardest and I was gassed afterwards as usual. But a few hours later, my energy was kind of fine. It had returned. I had a bit of muscle soreness, but I honestly felt pretty energized and motivated. So on that evening, I decided to go on a nice jog and I ended up running for 10K. And now I'm neither a fast runner nor a strong deadlifter. Not then, not now. So I don't want you thinking that it drastically gave me superhuman strength or endurance or something like that. It did not. But it did drastically change my relationship and my perception of post-workout fatigue and with soreness and recovery. Around this second week, I really started to feel like I had more energy reserves, both physically and mentally. And I also had less pain, soreness, and achiness. Before this, I just sort of thought these were like normal feelings that everyone has, and they would cause me to dial back on my training and take more breaks. Over the next few weeks, I upped the frequency of my weightlifting sessions from 3 times per 2 weeks, or once every 4.6 days, to twice a week, or once every 3.5 days. And then I continued that for the rest of an entire year, and then a few months ago, I upped to 3 times a week because I've been feeling even better recovery since then. In that third week, I went climbing for 3 days in a row for the first time in years. Now, a little background here. I love climbing and I've been getting more and more into it over the past 7 or so years, but I've had a pulley injury, I've had tenosynovitis, I've had 2 lumbrical tears, and pretty terrible tendinitis in both elbows that had stopped me from doing pull-ups and from climbing for long periods of time. And injuries are actually unfortunately common in climbing, but compared to how hard I climb, I feel like I got a lot more injuries than a lot of my peers did. And so over the last couple years, in order to deal and mitigate with these injuries, I would limit myself to 2 to 3 times of climbing a week and never 2 days in a row so that I could actually recover between them. But that week I was just feeling great. And so I climbed 3 days in a row and my joints felt amazing and my climbing performance wasn't deteriorating. I can't really explain why. I do suspect that something I was eating was somehow impeding my recovery or causing inflammation or otherwise harming me, but I'm not sure exactly what the mechanism was. And I do want to acknowledge that this is just me speculating here. I'm certain of what I experienced and how I felt, but I don't claim to understand why it happened. There are plenty of people in the carnivore space who talk more about these things from like a biological and scientific perspective. I think Dave McLeod and Dr. Georgia Ede are 2 of the sources I trust most on this. But as for my experience, my fitness recovery and my ability to absorb training without injury or pain seemed radically improved. And now here comes a twist. And any of you who have done a carnivore diet probably know what I'm about to talk about. After 1 week of eating nothing but meat, the diarrhea arrived. Now, it wasn't like urgent, need to get to the toilet immediately type diarrhea where you're shitting your pants. No, it wasn't like having a stomach bug or food poisoning where you're like glued to the toilet for 24 hours. It was just that my normal morning bowel movement became pretty loose. So on the Bristol stool scale, we're talking going from that lovely sausage we all know and love down to straight gravy, like literally overnight. So I had 1 day of basically gravy, and then the next day was actually harder than normal, more like corn on the cob. And so I looked into this, and it seems like this is a pretty normal part of your body adapting to inconsistent levels of dietary fat. Apparently, a sudden increase in dietary fat means that your gallbladder, which produces bile to help you digest fat, won't be able to ramp up bile production to match your suddenly increased fat intake. And as a result, the fat will just pass through your digestive system and make your stool a bit softer. Under-consuming fat can have the opposite effect. All the fat gets fully digested, leaving none to soften your stool, making it a bit harder. So over the next couple weeks, I gradually got used to this and also just got more used to eating a more consistent amount of fat. So I'd get better at sort of eyeballing my cuts of meat and understanding whether I wanted to add some fat to it or eat a little bit less or whatever. But at the very beginning, I got this wrong a lot and I had to adapt. So over the next few weeks, I had some pretty wacky poos. But again, it wasn't like I needed the toilet more often than usual. It was just that they were a little bit unsatisfying when I had poops in the morning. So it's not a huge negative. And as we'll see, I think this increased sort of bowel sensitivity ended up being a secret bonus that I didn't realize until later on. Week 3 came along and I noticed that my morning alertness started to skyrocket. Now, I am still not a morning person and I love a good lie-in, but I noticed a few interesting changes when I did wake up. My morning soreness and joint stiffness was markedly down. So I used to have this thing where I'd feel like a sharp pain kind of in the ball of my foot during the first, I don't know, like 100 steps or so when I'd get out of bed. And often my full back and legs would be like very sore. So not like a specific muscle DOM, but like just a general feeling of stiffness and I don't know, not feeling quite right. And I could never really associate it with a specific type of physical activity that I had done the day before, for instance. But this just vanished completely around week 3. I would still get muscle DOMs, but the quality of them changed a little bit. It was much more localized, specific feeling of muscle tiredness and tightness rather than my like whole back or my whole leg being sore. And so in short, I was just starting to feel more energized and recovered early in the morning. And this led me to decide to try to give up coffee. Now, I love coffee, and the last time I gave up coffee had been about 15 months before. I did it for 30 days, and it took me almost 30 days to go from my normal 1 to 2 cups down to 0, and it was fucking agony. I felt useless, and I really had trouble motivating myself to work. Like, I really felt worthless. It was terrible. It was the closest I felt to a serious depression in decades. But since I was trying a meat-based diet, and of course coffee is a plant, I decided, yeah, maybe I should give it a shot again, especially if my morning energy levels seem to be pretty good. Why not? So I started weaning off. By the way, I have a video on weaning off the bean if that's something you're interested in. I measured my first day's coffee, which was like 13 grams of beans, and I went down by 2 to 3 grams each day. And once I got down to 4 grams, I had a really weird experience. I woke up and I did my morning walk, and then I made my little espresso. And then within like 5 minutes of starting to drink this espresso, I just had the strangest sensation. I was suddenly really tired and like a bit weak. I had the sense that somehow the bean was like sapping energy, like sucking it directly out of my muscles and out of my mind. And I realize how weird that sounds, but I remember this quite distinctly and I wrote it down. It was as if the coffee was draining me of my energy instead of giving me energy. So I didn't finish it, and then I didn't have any coffee the rest of the day. And compared to the previous time I had done a coffee detox, it was like 100 times easier. My energy didn't feel terrible. I didn't get those kind of helpless, depressed feelings of like not being strong enough to go through with it that I had gotten before. It was just kind of fine. So I continued with zero coffee for the next 2.5 months before heading on a trip to the UK over the winter holidays. On this trip, we had like 12 hours of jet lag, so I decided to reintroduce caffeine over the jet lag period to help deal with that. And that time I experienced none of those same energy draining feelings, and I never have again. So I'm curious to you viewers, have any of you ever experienced this? A feeling where coffee is making you like very acutely tired right after drinking it? I have no idea what that was, but it hasn't ever recurred. So in the end, several months later, I decided to go back on coffee because I just love the morning ritual of it. And I do think I'm slightly more productive in the mornings when I'm drinking coffee than when I'm not. However, now I feel much less addicted to it. And now I feel much more capable of detoxing whenever I want, which was previously absolute agony. The next thing I started to notice at the end of the first month was just general overall happiness. It kind of crept up on me over time. Or maybe a better way to put it is like a positive mindset. I just felt content and less stressed and worried generally. And I think there was also a synergistic effect with all of the other physical changes that I was having. I was big into lifting, climbing, and just active living, but I had always felt that I was like a little bit too fatigued, too tired, and too injured compared to my peers in order to keep up with them and be able to do all of the things that they were doing. As if my biggest weakness was just not being able to handle quite as much activity as some of my other friends. So when I suddenly started to be able to notably increase my activity levels, feel less injury prone, and just be more confident and more able to say fuck yes to opportunities in life, I think it had a huge spillover effect to my overall well-being. I also started to feel really optimistic about the diet itself. I felt like I had discovered some secret weapon, something super powerful, and like it was going to point my life in a new and more exciting direction. Now, I know this might sound like hyperbole, but I really felt this way. And it wasn't as if the circumstances of my life had drastically changed overnight. It was really just the perception of them. And of course, I'm not the first person to report feelings like these. It was in fact Dave McLeod's insistence that he had overcome 20 years of depression by simply switching to a ketogenic diet that convinced me to try the keto diet for the first time many years ago. So by the end of the third week, my poops were much more nice and regular, if smaller and less stinky, and the next problem arose. I would go to sleep as normal around 10 p.m., and I'd sleep like a baby until 3 or 4, but then suddenly I'd just be wide awake for like 1 to 2 hours till like 5 a.m. And at this time of day, it's like too early to really get up, so I'd kind of stir restlessly in my bed or read my book a little bit or try to just meditate or count sheep or something. All right, well, my camera just died there, so now it's another day, but I'm still wearing the same shirt for continuity's sake. You're welcome. So what was I talking about? Yeah, I guess I would estimate that I probably had this poor night's sleep thing roughly 3 nights a week for the following 3 weeks. And honestly, this really bothered me because I wasn't doing this diet in order to relieve myself of some terrible symptoms from a disease or to lose a ton of weight, or honestly, really to solve any specific problem. I really just wanted to see if I felt better. And of course, having a good night's sleep is extremely important. But nonetheless, sometime between 4:30 and 5, I would usually get back to sleep. And then when I actually woke up in the morning, my morning alertness was pretty fine. And as I've already stated, I had really good morning energy. I felt like I could focus really well on tasks. I had great recovery and great energy for doing physical activity. So despite having an experience at night that felt like my sleep quality was poorer and shorter than usual, during the day, it was as if I had been sleeping really, really well. So it was kind of bizarre. So I researched this one online and I never really found anything concrete. So drop your opinion in the comments if you have any ideas about this or if you've experienced something similar. But the most common answer I found for people struggling with sleep while transitioning to a carnivore diet was essentially that your body would get a spike of cortisol during the night when energy availability apparently plummeted or something like that. And while mechanistically, I suppose this makes sense and seems plausible, the idea of my body suddenly running out of energy in the middle of the night while my heart rate is like 48 beats per minute and I'm literally sleeping seems just kind of bizarre to me, because during the day I'm fasting during the mornings and not feeling hungry. I have plenty of energy to run for an hour and a half and I'm doing high intensity workouts. So at all these times where my body's demanding huge amounts of energy, it's like there in abundance. And it seems kind of odd that I'd be like bonking in the middle of the night. So I'm not sure I really believe that necessarily as a cause. The two remedies that people recommended were, one, to try supplementing a small amount of carbs for a short amount of time. So over the next 3 weeks when I woke up, I would just guzzle a little bit of honey, which was delicious, but I'm not sure it really helped. I don't know if I actually went to sleep faster after doing that. The second proposed solution that I heard from folks was to just get more fat in your diet. So I consciously made sure that I was either choosing fattier cuts of meat or I was adding extra butter to my existing meals in order to make sure I was getting more fat. So after these 3 weeks of intermittent poor sleep, it seemed to level out and I was kind of back to normal in terms of my sleep quality. So this brings us to the end of the first 6 weeks of this diet. At this point, my wife has come back home, and so I've already overstayed my original intentions for a 30-day diet experiment. But like, I'm really into it. As I mentioned, I'm starting to feel really, really great, both physically and mentally, and I just have this sense of like hope. Like if I continue to do this, I'll keep learning more things and I'll keep having new benefits. So at this point, I decided to go all in for the foreseeable future. Now, it's worth noting that up to this point, for the first 6 weeks, I was very strict. I had been eating eggs, dairy, beef, pork, chicken, and fish, some homemade bone broth, and salt. I wasn't eating any spices. I had weaned off coffee. I wasn't cooking with any seed oils, only butter, ghee, and any leftover tallow I had. And I reckon during the 6 weeks, I had alcohol roughly twice. So at this point, I had sort of proved the concept to myself, but I decided to be a little bit less strict going forward. So my pragmatic approach was simply to be very strict when I was cooking for myself, but not be afraid to compromise in social situations. So for the next year, I would estimate I drank about once every fortnight, which for carnivore people is probably a lot, but for me in my life, that was way less than any year before. But there were two big exceptions to this. I went on 2 large trips during the year. The first was a 1-month trip over the holidays to the UK and to Thailand. And the second was a 2-month trip to visit family in the States, Hong Kong, and Fiji. And one of the hardest things about an animal-based diet is that you basically can't get it at any restaurant in the world. So if you're traveling and you're not cooking for yourself, sure, you can choose options on menus that have a bunch of meat in them, but they're always going to have plants, they're always going to have spices, and they're almost always going to be cooked in some sort of oil. So if you want to eat out and share meals with people or just taste local cuisine while you're traveling, you're going to have to compromise a little bit. So during these periods when I would be cooking for myself, as for most like breakfast and lunches, I would just buy local eggs and beef and eat those. But many times for dinners and holiday meals and stuff, I would just eat out and try to choose things that were more animal based, but I definitely consumed many plants there. So during these 2 trips then, there was basically 3 months where I was eating a lot of animals, but still a lot of plants. And so during this year, there were 3 months where I was basically not really doing the diet strictly at all. And so I don't count that towards my year. So when I got back from my final travel, I added 3 extra months on, so that in 15 months, I did 12 months of strict carnivore diet. And I actually found this approach gave me a lot more interesting information than I think just a 1 year strict would have done. Because I ended up taking 2 prolonged breaks during the middle, I could sort of see what symptoms returned, what symptoms went away, and just sort of the effects that changing from a strict diet back to a mixed diet and then back again revealed to me. And it was interesting to note that many of the changes I noticed seemed pretty durable, but others less so. So it's mid-December and I'm on month 3 of eating the meat, and we fly to Manchester to spend 3 weeks in the north of England in the Peak District with my in-laws. And I don't know if you've ever been to the north of England during December, but it's pretty bleak. It's 12 hours of jet lag from where I live, and so it's the worst possible jet lag you can have on Earth. And for the first 4 or 5 days, we're sleeping terribly, waking up at like 3 in the morning or something. And the problem with waking up at 3 in the morning in December in England is that you have to wait for like 4.5 hours until sunrise. So during this period, we're sitting in the kitchen, drinking lots of cups of tea, and I'm sort of weaning myself back onto caffeine a little bit to help with the jet lag. And so during this period, other than like the normal fatigue and lethargy you get from being jet lagged, I'm feeling pretty great. We ended up staying 3 weeks in the UK, and though I was surrounded by a lot of people who are coughing and hacking with the normal cold and flu things you get in the Northern Hemisphere winter, I never came down with any cold or flu symptoms, which is a big departure for my adult life. I would estimate that basically ever since college, I've probably had 1 or 2 weeks each winter where I'm not necessarily sick in bed, but I'm significantly ill to the point where I'm not doing all of my normal activities and I'm like, turning down social situations because I just don't feel good enough and I don't want to get people sick. But that didn't happen during this visit, and it didn't happen the entire winter, which feels amazing. It made me feel so healthy. Now, was that caused by that diet? I don't know. I sort of believe so, but I don't know. So as I mentioned during this trip, when I'm cooking for myself, like most of my lunches, I'm doing pretty strict animal-based, but many of the dinners and sort of holiday meals I'm sharing with the family and eating like a completely mixed diet. I was also drinking a fair bit of booze during this period, as the British like to do. And one of the things I noticed that the morning aches and pains that I had talked about, specifically that weird sharp foot pain that I would get, started to return by the end of the 3 weeks. It wasn't as severe as before I had started the diet, but it was notable enough that I wrote it down at the time. However, after the first week of being strict at the end of my holidays, it was completely gone again. So at this point, I'm starting to establish a bit of a stronger link between the diet and these symptoms. So now let's fast forward to mid-January. I'm back home from my travels, back on a more strict diet. And over this next month, I start to get really lean. At this period, I had to take some photos because I was by far the most jacked and lean that I've ever been in my adult life. It really felt like being lean was completely effortless. I was eating to satiety every single meal. I was never feeling hungry, like literally never feeling hungry or craving food. And like every month, 1 kilo would drop pretty effortlessly. I had started this diet around 82 kilos and my average weight had dropped down to like 79. So this is just one further anecdote to add to the pile of evidence about keto diets and carnivore diets being useful for weight loss. I think the way that it affects your hunger just makes it super easy to not overeat. But in my case, I didn't actually want to be losing weight. While I enjoyed looking lean and more jacked than I ever had, in my long-term goals, I actually just want to get pretty damn strong. And for me personally, I know that's going to require a lot of muscle growth. And so in this phase of my life, I'm trying to bulk up and build muscle rather than be specifically lean. And so around February, I started to consciously increase my calories, mostly by drinking a bit more milk and adding a little bit more food, like an extra egg to every meal. This pushed me back up to the 80 kilo range. And then in June, I decided to commit to gaining roughly 10 kilograms, bulking up to 90 kilos in a year. And so now I'm like halfway through that and I'm chilling around 86 kilos. And so while it's definitely possible to gain weight on the carnivore diet and it's super easy to gain muscle, I would say, consciously overeating and bulking does seem to take more effort than I think it did on a mixed diet. I think it was very easy to just eat a bit of extra rice in a meal on a mixed diet and you could slowly gain weight that way. Whereas if you're just eating meat, it's like mentally difficult to overdo it. And unfortunately, overdoing it is the name of the game for consistently building muscle over the long term. So when my friends started noticing that I was leaner than ever before and my muscles were popping, they started asking me, John, what's your secret? What are you doing? You change what you're doing in the gym, you're eating differently, blah, blah, blah. I started having more and more conversations about my diet experiment. And this, I would say, is by far the hardest thing about a carnivore diet. It is having to explain to people why you are doing a carnivore diet. I imagine that this is an experience that I would share with my vegan brethren across the aisle. The questions you get, the mistrust, and the general social unacceptability of doing what people consider to be like an extreme diet or something that, doesn't match their norms and their culture. However, I would imagine that because veganism is so in vogue these days, that it's probably a little bit easier for those people to sort of explain what they do. At least in my experience, I think the people that I tend to surround with have a slightly more left-leaning bias than the actual average person, and so they tend to have this sort of plants good, animals worse kind of viewpoint. This is generalizing greatly, but that's what I experienced. So I kind of struggled to have these conversations. I started with what I personally feel is by far the most compelling reason to do a diet experiment like this, which is simply to maximize nutrition. If you just ask yourself this very simple question, what foods contain the most essential nutrients required for humans in the highest quantities and in the highest concentrations? And what would a diet that emphasizes those foods look like? Well, of course, you can just look this information up, but most people don't actually do that. If you do that, you'll find out that it's animal organ meats, then general muscle meat and fish, then eggs and milk. On the vegetable side, you also have some leafy greens, which are quite nutrient dense. However, most of those are lacking in some nutrients. They usually don't have much protein or fat, but they are very good sources of many micronutrients. So if we can define healthy foods as being foods that are the most nutrient dense, then you would find that almost all of the healthiest foods are in fact animal foods. And if you wanted to make a diet that was the healthiest, it would be a diet that contains the most of the healthiest foods, i.e. the most animal foods. Or in other words, an animal-based diet. So I think something like an animal-based diet, maybe more like paleo, is kind of the obvious conclusion if you move from strictly nutrition as a starting point for what you should eat. Now, there's no reason you couldn't go more like paleo and add a bit of fruits and vegetables to suit your desires. If you do that, you can maximize certain micronutrients like vitamin C or magnesium if you're looking for specific plants that are really good sources of those. However, generally speaking, if you're adding plants into an animal-based diet, you are overall diluting the nutrient content of that diet. There are definitely plants that have higher concentrations of specific nutrients, but if you're looking at all of the nutrients that humans actually need as a whole, animal foods just win every single time. Getting all nutrients from animal foods is much, much simpler than getting all of them from plants. So to me, that's very uncontroversial and convincing. But honestly, no one I know is trying to hear that shit. The anti-meat conspiracy runs deep in our culture. People think meat causes cancer, but they don't know why. They think saturated fat and cholesterol are going to cause heart disease and make them obese, but they also don't really know why, especially given that in the West, red meat consumption has decreased in the last 50 years, while obesity rates skyrocket. So I honestly found that it was just too challenging for people. I think it was too contradictory to their beliefs, the beliefs that they hold deep, even though they might never have really seriously considered and challenged them and see where those beliefs came from. Were they based in fact, or were they just based in rumors that they had heard that don't really have much substance to them? So ultimately, I settled on a response that I use now, which I think is a better way to talk about the subject. I eat this way because it makes me feel better. And it makes me feel better than any other way of eating that I've ever tried. If I can find a better way, you can bet I would happily switch. But my energy levels are better, my recovery is better, I maintain my weight more effortlessly, I never feel hangry, and I just feel more confident and happy. And for lack of a better word, I feel like more, powerful in my life. And if I could get that on a mixed ordinary diet that was logistically less complicated than what I'm currently doing, yeah, I'd be up for that. I'd be okay with that. But I just haven't found that to work for me. I don't deeply understand the science of why this makes me feel better, but I'm very, very confident that it does. And ultimately, my experience is the most important thing to me. If I think it works, I'm going to keep doing it. So how about you folks? How do you navigate these tricky conversations about diet with skeptical folks? Let us know your tactics. It can definitely help us out. So February passes like a dream, and then comes March. At this point, my wife picked up a cold while she was traveling, and she had some rough symptoms for a couple days. During this period of being exposed to the illness, I noticed something interesting. I didn't get my usual cold symptoms like cough, congestion, low energy, fever, soreness, those kind of things. But I did have like 4 days of loose, but not urgent, stool. So probably in that chicken nuggets to porridge kind of zone. And I bring this up because it kind of happened again later. So if I fast forward to June, my partner came down with another cold flu kind of thing. And again, the only symptom I got was a bit of wet doo-doo. And so here's some total speculation on this thought. My thought is that somehow my immune system, or maybe just like my gut, is somehow becoming more effective at warding off infections before they like take root in my chest or my respiratory system or something like that. I had this sensation that my body was like trying to cleanse itself and effectively doing so before I could get any of the worst symptoms that would normally come around. So I don't know if that's true, but it was definitely a pattern during this year that it seemed like when other people would get sick around me, previously I would have gotten sick, and I did 1 or 2 times a year for most of my adult life. But this year I just didn't, and it was pretty fantastic. So question for you guys, have you noticed any change in the way you get communicable diseases? Do you get them more? Do you get them less? Do your symptoms change compared to what they used to do when you were doing a different diet? Curious to know and gather more anecdotes on this. So March then became April, then May and June and July, and there were no big changes for me during this period. I continued feeling great, improving my overall happiness as well as my strength and my training. I had 0 injuries during this period, so I didn't need to take any extended breaks from training. And then when August came around, I started prepping for a 2-month period of travel when I would go to Fiji on holiday and then visit my family in the States and in Hong Kong. Ahead of this period, I did another coffee detox so that I could again use coffee to effectively treat jet lag. And yeah, again, detoxing was a breeze. I still prefer drinking coffee to not drinking coffee, but the ability to like turn it off in a few weeks' time without many symptoms is pretty fantastic. So then this trip marked a 2-month break from the diet where I was eating local foods in abundance. And same as the last time though, for meals like breakfast where I was cooking for myself, I would just usually have meat, eggs, and cheese. And so during this period of 2 months, I actually ended up losing 2 kilos while eating out extensively, always to satiety, and still doing strength training 2 times a week while on the road. Actually, I have a whole series showcasing every workout I did during that period while training on the road. Feel free to check those videos out if you're interested in feeling the best you can possibly feel while on the road. But here are some notes I took during the second week of this diet break. Symptoms going back to normal food. Inconsistent poo, belly cramps, bloating, terrible gas. Mild pain to the touch when I run my hand over my abdomen. Feeling of nauseousness, snoring. So a bunch of things that I've just thought that were part of being an adult and being me in this world living in my body came back, which had gone away. It's wacky. Nutrition is so overpowered and yet so underutilized. So now let's fast forward to Hong Kong. One day we're out shopping in the Wan Chai Computer Center, which is an absolutely crazy place. If you've never been there, you can get any electronic in the world at obscene prices, and it's absolutely fantastic. But it was otherwise a very normal day. I didn't have breakfast because I usually don't have breakfast. But around 12:30 to 1, I started to notice my tummy rumbling. And we were wrapping up our shopping, but I was kind of like, yeah, I could really go for some food right now. Let's find a spot. And we were having some trouble choosing a restaurant to go eat at, and I just noticed that I was getting stressed out about this. Like, what is this? Why am I feeling irritable just trying to choose a place to eat? And then it hit me. I'm hangry again. I hadn't been hangry since I started an animal-based diet, but it finally came back roughly like 6 weeks after doing a mixed diet again. So over the next 2 weeks of still doing a mixed diet, it never came back. It was just this one time, but oh my God. When I had that realization, I was like, oh, I need to stop this. Like having hanger ruins my day. It just makes me feel absolutely terrible, and I just never want to experience that again. And if the price to pay for that is that I just strategically avoid carbs, I think I'm willing to pay that probably for most of my life. And to remember that I just used to have this feeling almost every day before dinner time, or if plans would change and the food would come late or something, is kind of crazy. I just can't believe I put up with that for decades of my life. So the travel goes well, and then in mid-October, I return home and I go back on the animal-based diet. It had been fantastic sharing local food and good times with the friends and family, but physically, I wasn't feeling the top, so it was really great to get back to the diet. So I hop back on it, and almost immediately I go back to feeling 100%. I didn't get any diarrhea this time or any of those other transitional symptoms, except about 3 weeks in, I start having those same sleep problems again, waking up around 3 or 4 in the morning for 1 to 2 hours. This time it just lasted for about 2 weeks, and then it went away and again has never returned. So for the next 2 months, I continued on carnivore, and then I finished up a whole cumulative year on Christmas Eve having a nice mixed dinner with a bunch of friends. So that brings us to the end of my veggie-free year. And yeah, I'm super grateful that previous me had the guts to take a risk and do something that most of the people around me thought was pretty stupid and pretty weird, because ultimately it made me feel better than I have ever felt before. And I cannot overstate the importance of that. It's just amazing how I've been able to feel. And it's way, way better than I could have expected. And I honestly think that when I look back on this experiment in a decade's time, I will probably list it as one of the most important life experiences I ever had. Because nutrition is that important. We are what we eat. It has such a huge impact on how we experience this world. And if you're doing something that just doesn't work for you or that doesn't agree with your body, only because of cultural habits you've picked up over a lifetime that you haven't actually tested and tried changing, you might really, really be limiting yourself. And I don't wish for you to do that. So I want to make a couple closing remarks on this before I let you guys go. I wanted to quickly discuss body weight. Generally, I find it very easy to gradually lose fat on this diet. So this sort of shows in the general trend of my body weight during the year, is that when I'm not consciously trying to control how much I'm eating, I'm slowly losing a little bit of body fat, which makes sense because I have body fat to lose. Of course, for me personally, with my goal of building more muscle, I didn't actually want to lose that body fat because I wanted to consistently be gaining weight. So I had to consciously overeat in order to avoid losing weight. So now while I'm recording this, I've actually changed my diet a little bit. I've added a bit of rice, I've added a bit of honey, and the occasional fruit. And I definitely find that putting honey on my regular meals and adding a bit of rice makes it so much easier to bulk up. It's like I can just immediately eat like 10% more without even thinking about it, which is fantastic for gaining muscle, but probably pretty bad if you struggle to lose weight. So I think my experience matches what most people see, which is that weight management can be very, very easy, and you don't really have to think too much about it on a carnivore style diet. So I learned a lot this year, and I'm going to soon make videos covering some of those topics in more detail, but I wanted to leave you with the two main themes that I experienced about this, or the two main lessons that I'm taking away. The first is quite simply that I feel younger than I ever have before. I'm 34 years old now, and I think that at 24, I felt less strong, less energetic, less healthy, and less just like in control of my health and the general direction of my life than I do now. And before I started this, I don't think I would have been able to say that. The second theme here is a bit more nuanced, and I think it's just one of eye-opening. I feel like I've lived my whole life in the dark in some sense. I have unknowingly suffered from some ailments that seem to be, at least in some part, caused by the way I was eating, despite that way of eating actually being pretty close to many of the diets and recommendations recommended by health professionals. I got hangry and I had weird energy spikes often. Now I know those things are optional. I had nearly constant gas and bloating after meals. Now I know that's optional. Many of the minor discomforts of the body and mind that I used to have also just disappear with this way of eating. If I simply eat different foods, the overall quality and character of my experience in life changes for the better. It's insanely powerful, and I had no idea that this existed before I experienced it myself. It's like, it's so potent. It's way more potent than any single drug, and nature provides it. So if there's one real level of growth that I actually achieved with this experiment, I think it was sort of the meta skill of now being more open to radical ideas, more open to trying them myself to see what lessons that I can learn and that I can apply to my life in the future. If you just listen to authority figures that push mainstream ideas all the time, you will miss out on valuable insights and experiences. That's guaranteed. And some of these might be experiences that could truly be life-changing for you. So me, I'm going to move into this next chapter of my life with a bit more hope, a bit more curiosity, and less skepticism towards radical ideas that don't really make sense to me at the outset. I'm going to try to embrace the will to actually engage with the more interesting nuance in life, and to continue learning, growing, moving, and improving. So I hope you join me, and let's get strong for life together. If you've already got the nutrition down, but you don't know how to train, check out my free program, The 2-Hour Body. Link is in the description. And for the rest of y'all, I hope you'll subscribe if you like this, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.